In this video, we are going to construct a frequency distribution table using raw data. But before we start, let's make sure that you have the things necessary to do the formulas in Excel, the statistical formulas. You can make sure that you have those by going to File, Options, Add-ins, and then to Excel Add-ins, and make sure that the tick box next to the Analysis Toolpack is checked, and then click OK. So, now that you have the necessary toolpacks for statistics, we can start constructing the frequency distribution table. Very important before we construct the frequency distribution table is to get these values. First, we have the highest value. Okay? In order to get the highest value from our raw data here, we need to use a formula called maximum. So in order to start a formula in Excel, you always need to press the equal sign. And then the formula name, maximum or max. So we double click max and we highlight the data points. Make sure you've highlighted all data points and then press enter. The next value that we need to get will be the lowest value. In order to do that, we will use the formula minimum or min. So we'll double click min, highlight all of the data points, and then press enter. The next value that we need to get will be the range. Remember, the range is just the difference between the highest value and the lowest value. So the formula that we'll use to get the range will be the highest value minus the lowest value. Next, we need to get n. N stands for the number of data points there are in this data set. Now we know there are 100, but we need to just make sure. And we can use a formula in Excel to do that. The formula will be count. Double click on count and highlight all of the data points and press enter. Next, we need to get the logarithm of n. To get the logarithm of n, just press the equal sign and then type log. Okay, the first log here, not the base 10. Double click and then click on the cell where n is, then close parenthesis, and then press enter. The next value that we need to get will be k, or the number of classes for our frequency distribution table. The number of classes refers to the number of rows that we are going to make under this table. So in order to do that, we need to add 1 to the product of 3.22 and the log of n. Next, we need to get the class width or C. Class width will be how wide will one class be? Remember, there are 7.4 classes that we need to make. So class width is going to tell us how wide should each of the 7.4 classes be. And the formula is simply to divide the range by your K, your number of classes. Now that we have all these values in place, we can start building our frequency distribution table. Let's start with the class intervals. So you have here the lower limits and the upper limits. So what should be our lower limit? You can start from the lowest value. We already know that the lowest value is 32, so I'll type in 32. Now, what will be the upper limit for this class? Okay, so we already computed for the class width, and that's 17.34. We might want to round that off to 17. In order to know the upper limit, we simply add 17 to 32. So we use a formula, equal sign, 32 plus 17. And then press enter. So the next class's lower limit will now start at 50. And the upper limit will be 50 plus 17. Now you might have noticed every time we type a lower limit, we always compute for the upper limit by adding 17. We can somehow make a program of that in Excel, a very simple one, and here's how we do that. Press equal sign, and then this lower limit plus the class width. But because we always want to add the class width to the upper limits here, we can tell Excel that this cell has an absolute address by typing a $sign before the letter and the number address of that cell, and then press enter. Okay, so how many classes have we have so far? Do we have so far? That's 3 classes, and we needed to make 7.44 classes. Maybe we can round this off to 7. So what I'm gonna do is just drag this particular dot here on this cell to 4 more cells below to make the number 7. So now we have 7 rows, but it doesn't look quite right yet because you needed to add here the lower limit, which will be 86. Take note, it's now automatic. The upper limit has been added because of our simple programming in Excel. So what will be the lower limit here? This will be 104. And this will be 122. And this will be 140. Now we are done with all the 7 classes. But there's a bit of a problem. Our highest value is 161, but we only reached up to 157. So we needed to add another class. So let's just indicate here that we need to add another class. So we'll now have 8 classes. So again, we type here the lower limit, 158. And there's our upper limit added automatically. The problem with class intervals is that they have gaps in between. So for example, between the first class interval and the second, there's a gap between 149 and 150. For example, you cannot include here the numbers 149.1 and 149.9 because they don't belong to either the first or the second classes. We solve that problem by constructing class boundaries. So in the class boundaries, the lower limits will always be 0.5 lesser than the lower limits of the class intervals. So in this case, we have 32 minus 0.5. And then we can simply drag this one downwards. And we have the lower limits of our class boundaries. For the upper limits of the class boundaries, they are always 0.5 greater than the upper limits of the class intervals. So this first one will be 49 plus 0.5. And we can also drag this one downwards. I forgot to make the formula. Let's just delete this first. That's going to be equal sign 49 plus 0.5. And now we can drag this downwards. So there's our upper limit for the class boundaries. Next, the class marks. Remember, the class marks are the means within each class. So in order to get the mean, you need to use the formula average. So double click on average, and then we'll get the mean between 32 and 49. And that will be our class mark. And then we can simply drag this down. Next, the frequency. Okay, so for the frequency, you need to highlight first the whole column. And then press equal sign. And then the formula is frequency or frec. Double click on frequency. So it tells us here to highlight first the data array. So that's our raw data here on top. And then our bins array. This will be the upper limits of the class boundaries, because they are the ones that give limits to the frequency in each of the classes. And then after highlighting both of these, you then press Control, Shift, and then Enter. Again, Control, Shift, and then Enter. So here are the frequencies. Just to make sure, we'll total them. So let's use the formula sum. And that's 100. Next, let's fill up the column for the less than cumulative frequency. So in the less than cumulative frequency, we are simply adding the frequencies from the first class until the last class cumulatively, meaning they are adding up. In order to do that, we need the formula sum. Then we click on the first frequency, and then Shift colon. And then we put a dollar sign before the letter, and before the number, and then we can press enter. So when we drag this formula down, it's going to give us a cumulative frequency. Next, for the column of greater than cumulative frequency, we start this time from the bottom, going up. So again, the formula is sum okay, click on the first frequency from the bottom and then shift colon, then close parentheses, and then enter. And this time you may drag upwards. I forgot something. What have I forgotten? I've forgotten the dollar signs. So this has to have a dollar sign. Press enter. Then now you may drag upwards. The relative frequency is just the percentage. The frequency translated to percentage. So in order to get that, we simply have to divide the frequency in that class by the total frequency and then multiplying the result with 100. Now we can just drag this down. What have I gotten wrong here? Let's see again. Maybe we'll put these inside parentheses. Or let us put a dollar sign on this because 100 is an absolute address. Then press enter. And there you have it. V should total to 100%. And we have our frequency distribution table. Thank you for your patience, for listening throughout this video. And it's your time to practice making your own frequency distribution table in the assignment.